Welcome to Win-Loss Week, everybody. We are so excited to kick off our very first win-loss analysis lesson live on YouTube and on LinkedIn. My name is Nate Bagley. I'm going to be your host through this next 6 weeks of Win-Loss 101. And today, I am happy to be here with Cam and Cam Turbo and Cam England. They are two of several pieces of what we affectionately call the Council of the Cams here at Clozd. We have several employees named Cam, and the two of you have been here almost since the very beginning. So you've spent years helping companies discover amazing things, secrets to help them unlock their revenue problems, like win more deals, retain more customers. And so I'm really excited to tap into some of your knowledge. Cam England is affectionately known as the win-loss guy, and Cam Turbo just yesterday performed your 2000th win-loss interview. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
That's huge. So that's
been fun. It's been a good ride.
Yeah, that's so many interviews. So we're really excited to be here with these two guys. They have a lot to share with us today. Before we start, I just want to give you a couple housekeeping items. Then I want to tell you a quick story, and then we're going to tap into these guys' wealth of knowledge. The first thing I want to tell you is just eliminate distractions. We're going to try and keep this live stream to 30 to 45 minutes. There will be time at the end to submit questions. The best way to do that is just in the chat. If you're streaming live on YouTube or LinkedIn, we'll be able to see all of your comments come in. So that's a really great way to interact with us. And the second thing is just make sure you turn off all your alerts and get rid of all your distractions. These guys are going to be dropping some serious knowledge, and I want to make sure that you don't miss anything important. We want to give you everything that you need to set you up for success over the next 6 weeks to do something really incredible. And that really incredible thing ties in perfectly to the story I wanted to tell you. So in 1855, it was the beginning of the California gold rush. People from all over the country and all over the world were flocking to California with the hopes of striking gold. And it all started because somebody discovered there was gold in the mountain. There's gold in the mountain. Somebody discovered some gold there, and the word spread, and people got really excited. And I know for a fact that people didn't just show up in California and start digging, right? If you're going to go on a gold rush, there's certain places that you're going to go that are going to increase the likelihood that you're going to discover gold. There were certain riverbeds, certain mines, certain mountains that were known to have really cool repositories or big repositories of gold. So if you wanted to strike rich in the gold rush, you had to go to some specific places that would increase your likelihood of finding something that would make you rich beyond your wildest dreams. And then once you got to that place, it probably wouldn't benefit you to just like start digging a hole and hoping that you stumble on a gold nugget. There are some specific strategies and some specific tools that you would implement, like a pickaxe or like a sieve or a pan if you were panning for gold. And so these strategies and these tools would help you find the gold and hopefully strike it rich. And I like to think of win-loss analysis as a modern day gold rush. And the gold that we're looking for, the gold that will essentially create, it's like the golden nugget inside your business that will create extra revenue just magically. It's hidden inside a specific place, and that's in your customers, their experiences, their opinions, their preferences. And when you go to that specific place and talk to your customers and use specific tools and specific strategies, you can find hidden opportunities inside your business to help you generate more revenue or retain more customers, which obviously will generate more revenue too. So for the next 6 weeks, our hope is to give you, like we've told you where to go. You need to go talk to your buyers. You need to go talk to the people who are actually looking for the solutions that you're providing and currently using your solution. So you go there, and then we're going to teach you the tools and the strategies that you need to use in order to dig up those golden nuggets and hopefully transform your business and become the hero that everybody celebrates for finding these new opportunities. So that being said, we're going to dive in today. And I want to start, let's just start at the very beginning. Today's lesson is about picking a specific revenue problem or picking a problem to solve. So Cam and Cam, if you were starting a win-loss analysis program today, you showed up to a company, brand new hire, and they're like, we want you to champion win-loss analysis. Where would you start to start looking for that golden nugget opportunity?
I think even going back to your analogy right there, I think that was a very applicable analogy to probably how a lot of people feel when they start doing win-loss analysis. I imagine those gold rushers came to, California and was like, well, maybe we do just start wherever, right? You probably had a lot of people that, maybe it was like, well, Death Valley has something, right? And like they learned very quickly that Death Valley probably didn't have anything. And so I think it's so easy just to, maybe get lost on where to start, where to go. Something that we found where, there's definitely the best practices, right? And so there's a lot of different ways to do win-loss analysis, but there are the best practices, and hopefully we'll save people a lot of time. The place where we would suggest first and foremost is going to your CRM data. Already at this point, whether it's Salesforce or any other CRM that you have this wide, variety of data that is usually just untapped, right? And so being able to tap into that CRM data and say, okay, what specific areas are we seeing? What specific regions are we seeing? What do we see from this data? Is there something we can start to dive into a little bit deeper? And I think that's like one of the big things where, rather than just kind of shooting from the hip, right? Just going to any random river, you start to say, okay, well, we know this specific area, there seems to be some questions there. Let's dive in there and maybe start in that specific region first.
Yeah, I think your CRM serves as a bit of a roadmap where it can start to tell you what's going on, but it's not going to tell you why that's happening. So I think, again, back to what Cam said, you're going to start to look at some different areas within your CRM as you run different reports and start to see where you're having challenges or where you seem to be succeeding, which can point you in the direction of where to start. And you can also, to some degree, also think about what are some of the internal hypotheses that you have as a business. Are the sales team talking about a certain competitor, bringing up certain functionality, or are there certain, areas of the business that internally you're hearing conversations about that might make sense to kind of layer on top of that CRM data when you're thinking about where do I go and start?
Well, and even, the nice thing about the CRM data too is it doesn't require, and we'll talk about this probably later on, is like the actual buy-in to maybe launch an entire win-loss program, right? With the CRM data, it's something you can probably just do with your own role, right? If you have access to your CRM, you can go in and just, make this a little bit side project. So when you do go for more of that buy-in or maybe present win-loss as a bigger idea, you already have some hypotheses. You can come to the table with some ideas saying, hey, we think in this specific segment, there's a gap, right? We're seeing a big difference between enterprise and SMB. Kind of like Cam said, we don't know exactly why, but that's just what the data is telling us.
That's awesome. So talk to me a little bit about, I know there are, when you go to a CRM, you run a couple of reports and you're going to just start looking for problem areas in the business. If you don't have a CRM, you can go talk to leaders and stuff like that. We'll talk about that in a minute, but are there certain, what are the specific problems that you think win-loss analysis is best suited to solving?
Yeah, I think there's a couple main areas. Like when I'm talking with someone that's exploring, hey, we want to build out win-loss, where do we go from here? We're starting at ground zero, at square one. And so the first thing I encourage them to do is look at your CRM data, use that as kind of a roadmap, but focus on maybe some key areas that you're probably already capturing within your CRM. So things that I'll encourage are look at your competitor field. Like, are there common competitors that you're facing as part of those deals that you're going to win? Is there a certain geography that either you're trying to grow market share or for one reason or another, you're seeming to struggle in? Is there a certain product line that's top of mind for you? Is there a certain deal size? Are you trying to play better in the mid-market space or in the enterprise space? Or churn is kind of that fifth one, where do we have a problem retaining customers and we need to go and figure out why? So again, and CRM data, the reason it's such a great place to start, just to build off what we already talked about, is it's such a low barrier to entry. So what Cam was saying, like, you don't need an outside vendor, you don't need a third party. Oftentimes you can go do it yourself, but it's such an easy place to start because it can, one, point you in the right direction, but two, it's usually an easier place to start.
I love that. So we're going to our CRM and we're looking for those 5 opportunities. We're looking for, I have them pulled up here. We're looking for geographic areas that you might want to compare to each other or see that they maybe aren't performing well, product line, competitor, deal size, and churn. Those are like 5 really easy problems to start looking at. Yeah, and get an idea of what, and then use win-loss analysis to go dig in and figure out the why.
Well, even if you want to narrow it down from even that, it's like start with your gut feel, right? Like most of the times you probably have a pretty good idea of what's going on in your business. Then kind of like Cam mentioned, go to these specific areas and kind of validate and be like, hey, if we think we have an issue in APAC, let's go look at the CRM data in APAC. is the CRM data telling us that, right? And if it isn't, or, maybe we jump to a different one, maybe we jump to a different region or a different, different segment, or maybe we still kind of run down that APAC line and we use the win-loss analysis to validate that we actually are doing as well as we think we are in that specific region, right? And I think that's one of the things that, people usually come to the table with win-loss analysis saying, hey, we want to solve problems. And so if they don't come in and like find all these, monumentous findings, they don't see it as a success, where probably the majority of win-loss analysis is validating what you're actually doing right already, right? And if you have that validation, then think how comfortable you would be, moving forward with your decisions, right? Where it's saying, hey, we want to double down on APAC. We want to continue doing what we're doing, and you can have that confidence to keep moving forward.
So confidence is key. I think
in all aspects of life, right?
Yeah, it's like I think there are probably a lot of businesses out there and a lot of business leaders, and you can drop in the comments if you can relate to this, who are kind of operating based on intuition, based off of best practices, a lot of hope, a little bit of guesswork. They're kind of casting a wide net and hoping like this marketing strategy or this sales motion pans out and results in something positive. And there's something really magical about going out and talking to 20 of your buyers and having them all say, oh yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head. It's like, oh, okay, we're doing the right thing. And maybe there are some small things that we can pivot, but generally speaking, we're heading in the right direction. Like that alone can be worth conducting 20 interviews for.
Oh, totally. And your gut feel can only get you so far, right? And so this is where it's like, start with that, move to CRM data, and then eventually you're going to validate that with the actual, speaking to the buyers.
Perfect. So talk to me about, as a first-time win-loss analysis person, somebody who's implementing for the first time, what are some roadblocks or the most common roadblocks that you think people might run into?
I think when I'm sharing kind of words of caution or words of advice around how to start out your win-loss program, one of the cautions that I'll kind of walk through is the quickest way that we see win-loss programs die. So like something to get ahead of, which is when the findings stay siloed within a single individual or a single team, and they're not shared out broadly across the organization to those different parties, those different teams, those different stakeholders that have a need to have that buyer feedback in order to go and execute on their jobs and their roadmaps. So then that begs the question and opens up the discussion of like, how do I effectively get buy-in at the beginning of a program? And so that's probably the other biggest thing that we'll dive into or run into when it's, okay, how at the onset of a program, how do we get people involved?
Totally. Yeah. And I think one of the other big things we see specifically with win-loss, because you're going to the end customers, and we'll highlight my friend Cam here, is the sales team, right? Like sometimes sales is just very, very hesitant towards this. I mean, they're the heartbeat of the business, right? They have these relationships. They've worked super hard on these relationships. The last thing probably reps want happening is some other person at the company coming in and kind of uncovering or talking about, uncovering is probably the bad word, but like
screwing up the relationship.
Screwing up that relationship, right? Like, and so I think that's one of the things that we do see maybe being a potential roadblock right out of the gates, is that the sales team, specifically reps, are a little more hesitant towards this. And they almost see it as like a witch hunt, right? Of just being like, why would I give you guys my opportunities to go talk to if you're just going to go in and tell me what I'm doing wrong in the deals, right? And we joke around a lot of times, when you're looking at, why people are losing deals in the CRM and there's that sales rep field, probably most of the time it's pricing and product, right? Like it's never the relationship, right? Sales reps are never going to just go in and botch a relationship. It's always going to be something else. And so I think there's a little bit of hesitancy as that feedback starts to come in, even, that it's not always the most pleasant experience, right? And like, I even think back to my own experience where we do our own internal win-loss analysis, and we were doing a churn analysis, and I got an interview back for one of my accounts that had churned, right? And we were certain that it was for budgetary purposes, and like it was strictly for, they had some management restructuring. And as we did this interview, it wasn't me that did it, but as I consumed this interview, I was like, oh wow, like yeah, some of those budgetary things were there, but then they had feedback specifically for me as their consultant of like, oh, like we felt that the interviews were starting to get stale because we'd been working with them for a year and we hadn't necessarily adjust the questioning that we needed to see. And that totally caught me off guard, right? Like I had no idea. I was like, if I would have known this, we probably could have saved this account. Right. And so, but at the same time, like these notifications went out to the entire company. It's not the most fun thing to see. But I think the nice thing we have here at Clozd, where we have a culture that it's not seen as that witch hunt, right? I didn't have leadership down my back just being like, you lost this account for us, right? Because they did see the bigger picture, right? And I think we were able to use it as a coaching moment and, take that to teach it as well. And so that'd probably be the kind of, one of the big things is as we work with sales, kind of portray and introduce it to them, it really doesn't come off as, hey, this is a company-wide initiative in order for us to get better, and getting them on board and helping them see that is this improvement. It definitely will make them, I think, a lot more receptive to this type of program.
Yeah. And I think, when it comes to launching a new program, one of my favorite things to see is initially in a lot of clients that we work with, there's that hesitancy from sales, but sales usually quickly becomes the biggest proponent of a win-loss program.
Totally.
Once they see the feedback come through and there's actionable steps for them about how they can go and win more deals. And whatever sales rep you're talking to, if you can help them win more deals, like you're speaking their language. But I think it does come back to that's one piece of the puzzle, is getting the sales team involved and getting them on board. But even beyond that, getting the product team involved, getting the marketing team involved, getting executive leadership involved in the program. And I think one of the best ways to go and do that is to have a conversation with those leaders and pose some form of the question of, hey, we're going to go out and talk to our buyers. If you were able to be a fly on the wall in that conversation, what are some major questions or topics that you would ask them or want to have covered? Mm-hmm. And use those questions or that conversation with those stakeholders and those leaders to help build out the interview guide or the topics of questions that you want to cover on those interviews. And that serves a couple of different purposes. One, it makes sure that you're focused on the right information in the interview. You're covering the right topics with your buyers. But then beyond that, you're going to have those leaders that are hungry for that feedback to come through because they feel like they've helped build that program. They've had an involvement in those questions that are going to be asked. And so I think that's it's often overlooked, but I think it's super powerful, is making sure that they have a say in what's going to be covered in those interviews so that they're hungry for the feedback that's going to come through.
Yeah, I can see how that would totally get buy-in right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Like if you can walk up to these leaders and be like, hey, what's the question that's scratching in the back of your, itching the back of your brain? Like what is the thing that you really want an answer to? Yeah, that immediately gets them invested. Like, hey, tell me what you found out. Like when you go do this, come back and let me know if you discover anything that can help me find a solution to this question. I can see how that would flip people from defensive to excited pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. That's a great strategy. Totally. Any other general mistakes that you see people make coming out of the gate when they're starting a win-loss analysis program?
The number one thing I have encountered when working with newer clients is they just make it too broad, right? They have high hopes, high aspirations. They want to go talk to every single customer, and there's a lot of resources and time that needs to go into implementing a strong win-loss program. And so that would be, kind of even going back to what we were talking about at the start with those specific areas, geographic area, segment, deal size. Get specific on where you want to solve that problem, right? You're probably not going to be able to go conduct interviews across the entire company and try to solve, every single segment. And so that's something that I would definitely suggest is, be specific and then stick to that scope, right? Mm-hmm. If your goal is to go do 10 interviews, don't go out and do, maybe 3 wins, 3 losses, 3 churns, right? Or do, 2 in Europe, 2 in APAC, 2 in North America, if you're trying to understand on a specific region. It's tempting because you do want to get that coverage, right? It's very tempting. However, but if you can come back and be like, hey, so we did 7 losses and 3 wins, right? And we did them all in North America, and they were all enterprise accounts. After those 10 interviews, you're going to probably be pretty confident saying, here's the things we learned. And we're looking at kind of hitting this point of saturation. Are we hearing the same things over and over again with these accounts? That gives you, once again, that confidence to say, okay, we're confident what we're finding is consistent across this entire segment that we talk to.
Yeah. You don't want to boil the ocean. And I think that's what the mistake a lot of people make. And then ultimately the feedback, if you do take that approach, you have interesting findings. You understood or now understand why you won or lost a handful of different deals, but you don't have anything actionable to take back to your VP of sales or your VP of marketing because there's no consistency in kind of your outreach process. So
one other thing I'll throw in, Nate, is I think we see a lot of times just like this paralysis just by analysis, right? Like they overcomplicate this whole process and they just don't get started. Right. And like, even like I mentioned, you got focus on maybe doing 10 interviews, maybe 5 interviews, right?
Or just one.
Get something out there. Right? Do one, right? Like, don't try to boil the ocean, like Cam mentioned, where, we're trying to launch this entire initiative and huge thing. Like, get that little bit of data. And then once you get data, that helps with buy-in, because sales can see what you're doing, right? These other departments can see the type of feedback, then they're all on board as well. And so just get something going, whatever that is. Don't just sit around and be like, well, we got to get this in place, this in place, this in place. Just start doing something.
Awesome. Well, I think what would be really helpful now is if you guys could give me a few examples of people who have had some win-loss successes, and maybe we can talk about what made those endeavors successful with regards to what we just talked about, or even just like examples of things that, more specific examples of problems that people should be looking into. So do either one of you have an example of, one of these 5 categories that we talked about, the geography, product line, competitor, deal size, or churn, that you could share with our audience to kind of give them, I think when they see it in practice, something might click and they'll be like, oh yeah, I can go do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one example that comes to mind is a new client that we were helping kick off and jumpstart their win-loss program had questions around a specific competitor, which is very, very common. Almost every company has questions about one competitor or another. And so they were wondering, hey, why are we struggling against this competitor? And there were some questions or some hypotheses around, does it have to do with our pricing and the way that we stack up against them? Or is it more of like a product and functionality problem that we're having when we face that competitor? And so we had some hypotheses to go and test. So we went out and did a handful of interviews for them. And they were, in fact, losing a lot to that competitor. They were struggling against that competitor, but it wasn't pricing and it wasn't functionality. What was happening once we validated that with buyer feedback was it had to do with the lead qualification process. So what buyers were telling us was, as they submitted kind of a request to talk with different vendors, the client we were representing was super slow to get those calls scheduled and reach out to them. And so by the time our client actually engaged with the prospect, they'd already met with that competitor 2, sometimes 3 times. So they were playing catch up. They were starting from behind.
If they already had a relationship with the competitor.
Yeah. And so it wasn't a matter of, hey, we need to adjust product roadmap or we need to overhaul our pricing. It was, we need to look at our lead qualification strategy so that we can start playing on even ground with this competitor. So once we were able to surface that, there's some internal conversations. They were able to make some adjustments, and fortunately, they no surprise saw win rates improve against that competitor once they were playing on even ground. So
awesome, it's a great example.
Yeah, one that comes to my mind is one of my clients. They realized they had issues with expansion. They could get people in the door, and their new business rates were actually pretty high. And even as we kind of initially did interviews on that new business segment, we realized that their product was viewed probably more strongly than I had seen in any other client I had worked with, right? Like the product was selling deals. Like they had a pretty high licensing price, but it was like, people like, it's worth it to go out and do it. And so they would buy, anywhere from like 5 to 10 licenses because the product was so strong. However, they started to realize that over time, like they weren't expanding past these 5 to 10 licenses. And so they just were like, we got to figure out what's going on with these expansion deals. And so we set aside, 2 quarters where we just went and looked at, people that were kind of running trial periods and people that were, in the door using it. And then why weren't they kind of rolling into these bigger programs? And as we did it, it came back. It was probably one of the more fascinating things where their licensing model was viewed extremely negatively, right? It was viewed as being a single tier, right? It was, you have this amount for one license, and doesn't matter how you scale as a business. You could, if you're paying the same for 5 licenses per license as you are for 10,000 per license, right? And so this feedback came in, and people were like, well, we just can't afford to scale, right? And so really what we were able to kind of present to them is saying, hey, these customers, they want tiered licensing, right? They need to be able to say like, hey, if we hit this tier, we need this to, bump down. We need different functionality available in the licensing and packaging model as well. And so that was some feedback we were able to provide to our client, and they've been able to go in and make changes to that licensing structure and be able to, grow that business more and kind of get out of their own way. Because that was the thing that was blowing our minds. We're like, this product is so strong, and yet their pricing is viewed so negatively. It's like, figure that out, and then you might have the holy grail right there.
I love that. One of my favorite stories from when last week I got to host our annual event, the virtual side, and one of our guests talked about how when he got hired, their sales motion, like they were approaching these really big enterprise clients and trying to close really big deals, and the deals were taking a long time to close. And they started going out and interviewing some of these closed lost deals, and found out that like maybe if they could get in the door a little bit earlier with like a smaller purchase with just like one organization, they might be able to expand a little bit. So they started testing out this strategy, and their win rate doubled, and their sales cycle got cut almost in half. And they found out that they were really good at the land and expand strategy.
Totally.
And so they completely changed their sales motion, and like it made all the difference. And all of a sudden they were closing a lot of these deals that they otherwise would have lost. And instead of like trying to capture the whole company all at once, they were just getting in the door with one segment and then growing from there.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that is nice.
And then one of my other favorite ones was Exactly.
Oh
They
yeah,
were doing churn.
we love Exactly. Yep.
They've talked with us publicly about this many times, about how they started doing churn analysis, and they were learning all these reasons that they were losing clients, like important clients. And then they were like, these are all fixable things. These are all things that we could have dealt with had we known earlier.
Let's do it. Let's get it earlier.
So let's do it earlier.
Yep, exactly.
So they started doing stay interviews, and they would interview their biggest clients, 4 to 6 months before their renewal date. And they would basically just check up on the health of the company. They'd talk to the executive sponsor, they'd talk to the day-to-day like manager of the program, and they'd figure out, hey, what are we doing well and what do we need to improve on? And then they had like several months to work on the areas of improvement, and they saw their churn almost disappear.
Oh, totally.
So
well, think about it. I mean, if you even just like break that down to like basic math, right? Like one of those accounts for Exactly is probably, I don't know, a couple $100,000, right? Like say it's a $200,000 deal. They dedicate a couple win-loss interviews to it, right? Which, takes time. It does take resources, right? But the return on that is so much greater, right? It's so much greater, right? Where it's just like, maybe you spend $5,000 trying just to understand what's going on with these customers, and then you hold on to a $200,000 customer rather than having them churn, right? It's something you can go in and fix, and it just seems like a no-brainer when you break it down to the numbers.
Yeah. I'm sure that'll be part of win-loss 101, but oftentimes when companies are asking about like the ROI, it's, hey, if we can help you win one more deal, you've paid for the engagement. Yeah. If we can help you win 2, 3 beyond that, like that's a fantastic ROI.
Right. Yep. So our goal with Win-Loss 101 is to set you up to succeed. We want to see you win some more deals. We want to see you keep some more customers. And in order to figure out how to do that, you got to start talking to your buyers. You got to start talking to your customers. So we don't want to fire hose you with information. We talked about a lot of things today. We talked about getting executive buy-in. We talked about reporting. We talked about a lot of things, but we don't want you to focus too far down the road. All we want you to focus on over the next week is one simple thing. I'm going to pull it up on the screen here. All we want you to do is choose a problem that you want to investigate over the next 6 weeks and be really specific with that problem. That's it. Pick a problem. Pick a revenue problem. Pick a competitor that you want to learn more about. Pick a product that maybe isn't performing very well right now. Pick a team or a geography that you think is overperforming and you want to figure out what are they doing that's setting them apart from everybody else, or underperforming. You can look at some of your churned customers. Like just go pick one simple problem, and we're going to focus our attention on doing win-loss analysis to figure out the answer to that problem over the next 6 weeks. So don't get ahead of yourself. Don't go too far down the line. Don't feel overwhelmed. We just want you to pick a problem this week, and then next week we're going to dive in and tell you what the next step is. And we'll have some new guests, but we have a couple of minutes here. We're happy to hang around and chat with you and answer any questions that you might have. This looks like Lisa Gonzalez has been tuning in. Dan is here on YouTube. So glad that you've enjoyed it. I have a couple of questions to maybe get us started. Yep. And I know there's a little bit of a lag between live and the stream, so we might get a couple of questions that trickle in here. But one of the questions that I have is, what happens when you're trying to get buy-in from your leaders and you meet some resistance? Like what would you recommend people do there?
Yeah, I think it depends a little bit where the resistance is coming from, but oftentimes, as part of the sales process, one of the ideas that we'll talk through with a prospect, and this could be done whether you are outsourcing win-loss to a third-party vendor or you're handling it in-house, but is to actually, as you're kind of having this internal roadshow, do a little bit of work beforehand and ideally like present a deliverable of what you're hoping to go do at scale. And so we kind of term it as like a free interview that we offer a lot of prospects as part of the sales process. But even if you were to go do that internally and find 1 or 2 or 3 nuggets from that interview that's maybe important to the product team or the sales team or whoever, and basically pose the question of, hey, isn't this cool? Do we want more of it? And so I think that can be helpful, where it's not just kind of this in the ether, hey, I have this idea, I want to go do this project and talk with our buyers, but hey, I've done a little bit. This is what I want to go and do more of. Are you on board? So I think that's always a helpful strategy. There's probably a ton of different strategies.
I think I would add to that is just like, kind of like you mentioned, Cam, like go get some type of data point, right? And this, a lot of times in win-loss analysis, it's not quantitative data, right? It's qualitative data. And that usually triggers into customer quotes, right? Those are powerful. It's hard to argue with customer quotes, and so that's one of those things where it's like, get started, do something so that when you do try to have these conversations, you can say, hey, here's some things that we've already found, right? Like we think we could find more of this, or we want to uncover if this is a problem that our other customers saying this. And, there's obviously going to be some culture changes that may have to happen, but I think that's one of the good ways to start breaking down those barriers, is just being like, hey, we need to make sure we're in tune with what customers are actually saying. This isn't me. This isn't my gut feel. This isn't my initiative. This is more of, I want to understand what the customer is actually saying.
Love it. What would you say to somebody who, we're recommending people start by looking at their CRM to figure out what might be the problem?
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to somebody who's like, I don't want to look at my CRM. Either one, I don't have access, or there's a roadblock there, or number 2,
data's terrible.
The data, I don't trust the data.
Yeah,
the data's a mess. I'm not I don't trust it. And so why would I base my entire win-loss analysis efforts off of messy data?
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, that I think that's very accurate, right? Like, my thought there would be, investigating even just the accuracy of the win-loss data would be helpful as well, right? And this is kind of going back to the biting off more than you can chew. It might make sense to identify 5 opportunities that you found in Salesforce that maybe fit this criteria, and then do deeper research. Reach out to the sales rep, right? Reach out to sales leadership and be like, hey, this is what we're trying to do. We just kind of want to understand this small segment. Is the story we're gathering, or is this accurate? And you can kind of validate some of that CRM data, because I think that's a common problem we run into with a lot of people, right? Like CRM data is usually always going to be messy and not always be the cleanest thing. But I think what we've even seen with the benefit is, as you start to validate the CRM data and kind of do it in small segments, you gain that confidence from the sales reps of being like, hey, they're going to start to help you out more in the future. And then one of the other kind of just benefits of win-loss analysis is you're probably going to start cleaning up your sales data information as well, right? You might be adding fields, getting rid of fields, and you kind of can attack these 2 problems at the same time.
Love it. Great answer, Tam. We got a question from Dan here. He says, I feel like I'm stuck in an interview echo chamber. I'm hearing the same trends in interviews, preventing me from providing meaningful updates. Is it as simple as asking different key questions? Like, how would you fix that problem?
Yeah, this is a good question, Dan. I kind of going back to what I was with my story about the churn account that I had, right? Where that was something we didn't necessarily recognize, that they felt like they were getting the same insights over and over again. And one of the things that, the first thing I would definitely recommend going and taking a look at is, looking at that interview guide. We call the interview guide kind of that questionnaire. What are the basic questions that you're trying to ask?
Which is what we're going to talk about next week.
We're going to talk about that next week. And the thing that I think is interesting about the interview guide is it's not just a list of kind of questions that you want to ask, but rather they need to be tied to larger objectives, right? And this is kind of going back to like, what's the revenue problem we're trying to solve? And so I would ask you that, Dan, like as you are looking at kind of your revenue problem, is that a specific problem? And then do those questions that you're asking align to that? And maybe you have the answers, right? And maybe it is time to pivot, or to say like, hey, we want to understand more about our pricing. We keep getting this, these answers about our pricing. Maybe we need to build out more questions about our specific pricing. And so don't be afraid to change your questions. I think one of the things people think with, these interviews or win-loss analysis is, we have to hit this idea of like statistical significance. We have to be, totally perfect statistically in how we kind of conduct this analysis. And we're that's just not it. We're talking qualitative, right? We're not talking quantitative. And so like our approach is like, we want to get on the call, and almost every single one of our interviews is different than the other one that we've previously done for that client, right? Like we're not going through and asking the same questions every single time. Our goal is to get on there and say, tell us, why or why not you chose this company. And then it might, it reminds me of like the Goosebumps choose your own adventure books, right? Where it's like, you might go down this path, you might go down that path, and don't be afraid to kind of dig into things on those calls. And as you start to dig in, you're going to be like, oh, we need to bring this up on every interview. We need to ask this question on every single interview. And hopefully that makes a little more, freshens it up a little bit and make sure you continue to get those insights.
Yeah. I think the obvious questions or things to look at is, are you talking to people in the same region? Are you talking about the same product line? Are you talking about the same competitor? So going back to kind of those original 5 or 6 things that you might look at when you're running that first report in your CRM, that's low hanging fruit. Those are the first things to look at. But the other thing, and this isn't terribly uncommon, is sometimes you have a win-loss program that reaches more of a point of maintenance, where you're using these win-loss interviews to kind of keep your thumb on the pulse, whatever the adage is, but to make sure that you are just staying in tune with the market and what's going on. So you may not be learning drastically new things that you did, especially when you compare that to the onset of your program, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it might just mean you're very in tune. Like, you're much more aligned with your buyers than you have been before. And you're hearing the same thing because you just have this consistent research that's being conducted. So that's not necessarily the case here with Dan, but it's might be a thing to consider is, hey, have I just been doing, getting good feedback on a consistent basis?
Yeah. It's like, don't be afraid to I think that's one of the things, like, don't be afraid to validate what you think you already know.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, because a lot of times people come into win-loss now saying, we need to get these monumental changes, find, kind of flip over our entire business. And a lot of it is, you probably already have a pretty good pulse on your business. If you don't, that's maybe another issue. Right. But like, you probably have a pretty good pulse. Don't be afraid of just validating things so you have that confidence to keep moving.
Yeah. You're probably not flipping a U-turn. You're just
a couple degrees
reorienting yourself just a little bit. Yeah.
Good point.
Another thing that comes to mind for me is the power of reporting. And this is something that we're going to get into far down the road, but it sounds like Dan's already kind of got his win-loss analysis program going. And I think there is power in having a robust reporting solution, because you might have conducted, 100 win-loss interviews, and you might be like, oh man, we have like a 53% win rate. This is really cool. But then when you start messing with the data a little bit, you might see the same general trends in your interviews, but when you start parsing out the data and comparing it and stuff like that, you might learn like, oh wow, our win rate is 53%, but our win rate on deals above $100,000 is 80%.
Totally.
And the thing is bringing our win rate down is these small deals. And they might be saying the same things about the product, and they might be saying similar things about the marketing. But when you're able to look at the actual data in a dynamic way and compare it, you might find trends that you didn't know existed just by talking to your buyers.
Totally.
So there's also power in reporting. So Dan, like, another thing you might want to do is go back and look through the interviews you've already done and try segmenting them in different ways, by geography or by, which team was managing those accounts, or, what was the deal size on each one of those accounts. And you might find trends that you didn't know were there before.
One thing on that, sorry,
But don't apologize.
I just know. Yeah, no,
chime in.
Well, it was cool because just yesterday we had an interesting call with a client who was able to segment it all the way down to sales rep, and they saw that certain sales reps were better in segments than other reps. Right? They realized like, hey, this sales rep he's struggling in enterprise, rock star in kind of the mid market, more transactional deals, but like when it comes to the big, like longer term deals, like he's really struggling. And so what their key takeaway for this was, hey, we need to actually probably just not assign these reps, like, because they were doing automatically assigning accounts to different reps. Like, we need to manually choose who's getting which accounts, right? And so anyway, I kind of go back to I applaud Dan, because I think this is like, we worry when our customers kind of tune out and just go into this autopilot mode. And, that's something we try to like alert them to, is just be like, hey, we are hearing the same things over and over again. Like I'm guessing in future podcasts, we'll talk more about the idea of saturation, right? Of like hearing the same thing over and over again, which is kind of the same idea of in qualitative that you hear in the quantitative world with statistical significance, right? And once you hit that point, like, yeah, we need to pivot. We need to make some changes, whether it's who we're talking to, interview guide, kind of findings as well.
And I think kind of a thought that just sparked is, it depends the context of what you're continually hearing. Is it a positive or is it a negative? If it's a positive, that's great, because that means you've kind of figured out your winning recipe and you're continuing to execute on that. But kind of a red flag is if this is a negative that you're continuing to hear, you're not doing anything about it as a business. You heard about this 3 quarters ago. You're still hearing about it today. Why haven't you done anything about it?
You might be dealing with that problem you mentioned earlier, where like the data is just staying with one person and not making it out.
Yeah.
There's some sort of change that's not happening.
Yeah. And I mean, when it comes to a win-loss program, the first half is let's get the information, let's get the data. But then the second half, which is equally, if not more important, is what are we going to go and do about it? So maybe, again, this is very surface level understanding of kind of what Dan's going through, but maybe we're missing that second part where it's, hey, we've got the data. We know what we need to go and do. Are we doing it? So
great. Well, that's all the questions we have for today. We've got about 40 minutes. We've hit our time cap. I want to invite you, if you're streaming on LinkedIn or YouTube right now, to go to winloss101.com. There's an actual like members area where you can get all of the recordings of these of this whole course that we're doing here, and we have a bunch of bonus resources that we're going to put in there, like checklists and guides and maybe some additional Q&A videos and things like that. So you know, these are streaming for free on LinkedIn and YouTube. Win-Loss 101 is also free, but the stuff that's on the site is a lot more comprehensive, and we'll give you some more bonus tools and resources. So head over there. Rodrigo, thanks for tuning in. Dan, Lisa, everybody else who tuned in and didn't comment, we really appreciate you. And we'll see you next week, next Friday, exact same place, exact same time. Thanks.